So today I'm demoing two different versions of the AFF Fuzz. As you can probably guess, AFF stands for Arbiter Fuzz Face, which both of these circuits are based off of. So even though one is clearly bigger than the other, they're both built on the same circuit board, just this has all the features of this, or most of them, but on trim pots on the inside. But the true difference between the two of these is that this one is based on silicon transistors, and this one is based on germanium transistors. And as you can clearly hear, there is a huge difference in tone, because the fuzz face is a simpler circuit than like your average overdrive or anything more complex than that. A change in the type of transistors can lead to a huge tonal difference. So I'll play some more and show you exactly what I mean. I'm playing my Stratocaster into Blues Junior, and I've actually shortened my signal path a little bit, so these two are at the very front, and they're true bypass, no buffers or anything aside from the delay right after. That's the clean tone. So first the germanium one. Back to the silicon one. So, as you can hear, there's a huge difference in sound. This silicon one is much higher gain. It has a brighter, maybe even a slightly more scooped sound to it. A lot of fizz to it. This, on the other hand, the germanium one, it has a much lower gain tone, but still, nice and fuzzy around the edges. Not as much fizz, more fuzz, if, that word gives you a qualitative idea of what I mean. And it's much darker too. So I'm personally, my ideal fuzz face would be somewhere in between, with the warmth of this, but maybe a bit of the presence and a bit more gain, but not quite as much as that. But that's part of the fun of fuzz face circuits. The silicon ones, you have to tune them just right to build them, and then the germanium ones, you just have to luck out and get a good pair of them, because they aren't really making them anymore, and so it's kind of luck of the draw anytime you buy a germanium fuzz. So as you can see, I have the gain cranked up on both of them. On this one it's labeled gain, on this one it's labeled fuzz. And fuzz faces tend to work best when you have them cranked like that. One of the joys of fuzz face type circuits is that they're very interactive with your guitar controls. So when you roll back your volume, you get a very dramatic cleanup that just works great for that kind of thing. this one. Because it's lower gain, it's a bit harder to tell. Well, actually, it's easy to tell. In fact, it actually cleans up like much better, but it doesn't have as much of the character as the silicon one, not as much of the artifacts, which may or may not be a good thing, depending on what you want. Like, that's a perfectly good, acceptable, usable Strat tone right there. But crank up the volume. The beauty of germanium fuzzes, especially lower to medium-low gain ones, is that it's easy to make a high gain fuzz, but lower gain ones, you get character added to your guitar sound without it being too over the top. There's a huge difference in tone there. So you may notice also that the tone controls are in different positions. This one I have it all the way up because it has a darker tonality, so I want all the treble to come through. This one I have backed off a little bit, but usually when I play this I have it backed off to here. So back off to there. And the tone controls weren't originally on the fuzz face circuit. I just added them because it helps smooth a lot of the high-end artifacts that are there, especially with the silicon fuzz, and just lets you get some different shades of distortion. Now, as you can clearly see, there's many more knobs on the germanium one. I can easily, because these are the same board, I can easily build a silicon one in this size enclosure with all of these features. But I'll go over them all now. And some of these are here with the silicon transistors in mind, so they're not particularly useful right now with the germanium setup. But it is what it is. If they were higher gain germanium, maybe they would be more useful. But anyways, there's this bias control, which right now I have cranked up pretty high. What that does is it essentially changes the bias voltage going to the second transistor, and it allows you to both alter the bias to make up for any changes that may happen with temperature, because germanium transistors are very sensitive to changes in temperature, heat, and everything. So you can adjust for that. It's a useful thing to have. Especially when you're gigging and out and everything. But you can also play around with it to get different sounds, like a much bolder sounding fuzz when you crank it towards the right. To more spittier, gated sounding thing. you want it ideally to where it's the transistor is biased to about 4.5 volts, is roughly around 3 o'clock. For this specific set of transistors in here. Ideally, I would have it at noon, but like I said, germanium transistors are pretty inconsistent, so it is what it is again. And this bias control works in conjunction with this gate control. So as soon as you start playing around with both those controls, you can get those really nasty Velcro-y type tones. It'd probably be more useful with higher gain or silicon transistors, or if you were hitting the fuzz with a higher output pickup like humbuckers or whatever, but that's more or less the gist of what that does. By the way, I have it labeled gate there, but it's actually on the board it's labeled feedback. This fuzz does have that control, but it's on a trimmer on the inside. Then there's the tone pot. But these transistors are plenty dark anyway, so unless you're using a very, very bright guitar, I would just leave it cranked all the way up for this transistor set. Then there's the fat control, which is actually one of the ones that is useful here. So the fat control, really all it's doing is limiting the amount of bass that is entering the circuit. Like, you know, bass entering a fuzz circuit is what gives that nice woolly sound that we all love about fuzz, but, you know, it can be hard to cut through a mix. So, you just dial it back some. So that's kind of cool to play around with, and you know, between the fat control and the tone control, you have a pair of EQs that can help shape the tone further than normal fuzz face would. But all the way to the left is pretty much your standard fuzz face setting. And then this pad control, again, another one that's intended more for this one here, the silicon, and this one has an input trimmer. A bunch of boutique builders have this kind of control in like the Analog Man Sun Face or the Fulltone 69. Basically, it just adds resistance to increase the input impedance of the fuzz face, so it cleans up easier. It's essentially like having a guitar knob in front of the fuzz, doing the same kind of cleanup thing. Just dial it back. And I know I've said this several times already, much more useful with a higher gain set of transistors than this particular set of germanium transistors, but you know, it's still a useful feature to have, and it can get you different shades of distortion. So yeah, even though this particular set of transistors in here would probably be better suited to a much simpler setup like this one, it's still a great sounding fuzz. The transistors I got for this one are just a standard 2N3904, is it? Yeah, 2N3904 silicon pair that I didn't even match up. I just used some resistors and the emitter to sort of dial back the gain. I probably could have gone much further to take the gain down, but the way it is now is how it gives the sound it gives. Whereas the germanium one here, the transistors I got from Smallbear about at least a year and a half ago. I remember buying them after Christmas as a gift to myself, along with a set of Tone Bender Mark II germanium transistors, which I was going to build, a Tone Bender and a fuzz face for myself, but I ended up building the Tone Bender and selling it to a customer instead, and the fuzz face ones I haven't used till now. And speaking of those transistors, that leads to the last feature here, this battery switch. So the transistors in here are PNP, basically in a configuration that they require positive ground power. What this means is that it's a little complicated to explain, but instead of the standard positive 9-volt power supply and negative ground, this requires a negative 9-volt supply and a positive ground. Now, there's a trick that I've used to wire up the jack there, so that you can use a standard power adapter, so that it still has the center negative pin. So you can use any power adapter, but because it's positive ground, you have to keep in mind that you have to keep it isolated from other pedals that are, negative ground. So essentially, that means you either have to use isolated power from like a brick power supply or something like that, or you have to use your own power supply, its own power supply, or keep it in a power supply with PNP pedals. So no daisy chaining with pedals that are negative ground. It's confusing, but I just want to make sure you guys know otherwise things won't work for you, and I don't want any of you guys to end up with damaged pedals or anything. Because if we were to daisy chain this one and this one together, bad things would happen. Anyways, one of the ways to get around it, and I can't really show it because I don't have a battery in here at the moment, is, if you want to just use battery instead, I just added this switch here so that it would help facilitate keeping it on a board, because fuzz faces don't use much power at all. They really don't draw that much current. So if you wanted to get something like this on a pedal board, you would just flip this up, and then the battery's connected and it works like normal. And then when you're done playing, you do that. So you don't even have to unplug any of the patch cables. You just leave it on your board, and just remember to flip it up anytime you want to use it, which is a much easier way than having to take out any plugs or anything, or worry about extra supplies. Plus, fuzz faces are one of those circuits that actually weirdly sound better when they have when they're running off of a battery as opposed to a power supply, just because the slightly lower voltage and the differences in resistance and capacitance of a carbon battery. It just it makes it sound better, especially with the germanium ones. But that's about all I have to show you for this. I mean, I could show you Actually, no, I need new strings on there. I was going to show you humbuckers into this, but it'd be more of the same idea. So. So that's the germanium one. And then the silicon one, which can also be built in a configuration like this with all the extra features. And they'd probably be more useful other than, well, even the battery one would still be useful for this. But this one currently has trim pots inside for like the bias gate and the pad. And it can also be built up with, you know, just a 4-knob configuration with the volume, fuzz, tone, and fat. And sorry, it's getting darker there. It's you know, getting closer to sundown, and unfortunately, you know, I'm just far enough from the light switch that you know, yeah. But one last play of the silicon one. And then for those of you who are curious, here's what they sound like stacked. A lot of noise. Dial back some of that bass with the fat control. Dial back the tone. So that's the AFF Fuzz in both germanium and silicon formats. Again, sorry about the dark picture, but hopefully that gives you an idea of what they sound like, or can sound like, because, as I said, not as much with the silicon, although I can tweak the sound a bit to sound lower gain and more refined, but especially with the germanium one, it's really luck of the draw when it comes to transistors, unless you get like special hand-matched pairs, which is getting harder and harder all the time. Yeah, but for those of you who are interested, I'm building these for in this format for $130 with the 3-knob format, volume, gain, and tone with the bias, gate, and pad controls inside as trim pots. I can build a 4-knob configuration for another another $15, so $145, and then this larger one, $160 for silicon. Germanium, it depends. Like this one, because it's not entirely to my taste. I mean, I love the sound of it, but I kind of want something higher gain and brighter. I'll let this one go for $170, but honestly, it for germanium builds, it really depends on the cost of me sourcing the transistors. So you'll have to contact me, and we can figure that out if you're really interested in getting one. Because Smallbear, unfortunately, because of smaller supplies of germanium transistors, limits the amount of germanium pairs that can be bought. So that's unfortunately the sad reality of using obsolete technology. But you know, if you really are interested, we can work out something, and I'll just work out a way to order from them, and I can build up a germanium fuzz face for you. Yeah, I love the smoothness of the germanium one. If I just had a little bit more gain and presence there, I would be keeping this one. But for what did I say, 170? This one can be yours, and this one particular one I'm keeping, but 130 for this format. Interesting fact. Even though I've, kind of rebuilt it several times over, this particular pedal is actually the very first pedal I built that learned, everything I learned about pedals started with this one. So there's your fact of the day. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. For more information, email me at tomfreemanaudioeffects@gmail.com. Please hit like, subscribe, and hit the notification icon for my YouTube channel. And last but not least, please follow me at Tom Freeman Audio Effects on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope I didn't bore you to death with all my talking and everything. Have a great day.